I originally picked this game up for a specific reason, to see if in the 10 years or so since I'd tried being an evil bastard in games, a developer has made a game that accommodates it in sensible fashion. Thus the video that accompanies this one, being evil in video games. Of course, I ended up just getting lost in the game itself, but that's a longer story. This will be a very spoiler-heavy review of the game because I'm more interested in sharing my thoughts on it than I am in selling the game to you. If you're wondering, hey, does WSAN think this game is good? Should I buy it? Then the answer is a resounding yes. You should buy it. I got the Mythic Bundle version on Steam because it was cheaper than the standard version. I don't know. Assuming I get this video out within the next week of writing these words, it's currently on sale and very much worth it, even at full price. I bought it at full price and have no regrets. This game gives you a real sense of the power fantasy an RPG wants to be. You start off as nobody, and by the time you reach endgame, you really are godlike. A single swing from a greatsword can behead a greater demon or send it spiraling 40 feet across the ground. Seriously, I had a couple of problems looting enemies because I killed them so violently. Luckily the game takes that into account. Your entire party is an ever-spinning buzzsaw, and all you really need to do is pre-buff, cast haste on them, and let it rip. Speaking of pre-buffing, let's talk about that for a moment because it's going to be relevant for the entire duration of your gameplay. There are three main types of buffs when it comes to duration. Ones that last so long that you don't have to care, minute per level, and round per level. A round is around 6 seconds long. There are a few other specific ones, like 1 minute buffs, and you can get feats to make buffs longer. You can even get 24-hour haste on some characters, but that's the gist of it. The reason this matters is because fights in Wrath of the Righteous can be really hard. You will need to buff during dungeons, and probably more than once, because those round per level buffs are insanely strong and high value. Whenever I mod a game, that's usually the beginning of the end, because seeking out a mod means I got bored enough to want to change the base experience. I think it was more of a thing when I was young and couldn't afford to freely buy games. But in Rat's case, no. I could see myself giving up on the game in the future if I couldn't have just a little bit of convenience. This is because the difficulty of the game necessitates being buffed all the time, and you have to rebuff after every rest. I think at about 100 hours in, I downloaded this mod called Bubble Buffs to manage buffing for me, because I was just really sick of pausing for 2 or 3 minutes before every single fight to manually pre-buff. For better or worse, the mod completely eliminates the probably deliberate push-pull game design decision of buffing versus time spent. It does change the game because now I am almost always walking around with my min-max buffs on. The problem is that if you aren't doing this, you're probably dying, and this is because of... Contrary to a lot of people in the COC2 community, I am not at all familiar with tabletop gaming. The closest I've gotten is collecting Warhammer figurines when I was about 11 years old, and playing Neverwinter Nights 2 on PC a lot. As a result, I knew close to nothing about making a proper build in Pathfinder when I arrived to the game. I decided to go in blind, and me being me, I love playing a full-plate armored badass wielding a greatsword. So the very first class I picked was Armored Hulk. Now, I'm not totally blind. I had a suspicion that Armored Hulk was really bad before I even picked it, because the way a lot of subclasses, or archetypes as they call them, work in Pathfinder is that they trade away class features for potential other features, and their strength is usually predicated on what you get back for those features, compared to how strong the original features were. And at the time, I already knew the Barbarian's core features were extremely strong, and that trading them away is generally a bad idea. Unfortunately, there were also a lot of things I didn't know, and I'll go into those in a bit. The difficulty spikes in Wrath are really intense, and it necessitates walking around with a buffed party at pretty much all times. You don't have to use the short duration buffs for every single fight, but the difference between unbuffed and fully buffed is night and day. One of the hardest fights in the game for me, possibly the hardest, was the one in the Angel Mythic path, where it starts with your entire party getting their buffs dispelled before you're immediately thrown into combat. So, Armored Hulk. On the surface, this actually doesn't look too bad. You still get your rage powers, you lose danger sense, but frankly that's not too big of a deal. Resilience of Steel is mostly worthless too, so we can call that a wash. You still get rage at level 1, which is actually not something that all barbarian archetypes get, so that's good. Indomitable Stance isn't really that relevant. There's about 2 enemy types in the game that actually charge you. One of them is a fairly trivial enemy type, and the other doesn't actually charge you that often. You lose fast movement, which isn't great, but you effectively gain it back by level 5, so whatever really. You lose Uncanny Dodge and Improved Uncanny Dodge, and unlike the other stuff, losing this actually really sucks. You're going to be in melee and therefore flanked very often, as flanked in this game just means 2 or more enemies are adjacent to you. This also opens you up to taking sneak attack damage, which is extremely dangerous, but you actually can't see the main problem with this archetype yet. And that's because the problem resides in game mechanics, not class details. The real problem is that this class revolves entirely around an obsolete feature, heavy armor. Heavy armor in Wrath of the Righteous is total shit. Absolutely irredeemably bad. I want to be clear about this. You can still wear it and be amazingly strong. You can easily play on the hardest difficulty available in full armor and be fine. However, you really shouldn't. Here's how heavy armor works, in theory. The idea is that you trade some things, ground speed, skills, your dexterity bonus, for increased protection. Heavy armor has a higher armor class, or AC, than other offerings, and enemies have to beat your AC to hit you. To be honest, this already sounds like a not great trade, but if you're totally new, you don't really know that yet. You might just have an inkling like I did. Firstly, almost all armor restricts how much of your dexterity bonus you can apply to your AC. Heavy armor is by far the worst about it, sometimes limiting you down to literally 1 dexterity. This means that the AC that you're gaining from putting heavy armor on, from the very beginning, is being somewhat offset by the dex bonus to AC that you're losing. However, this doesn't paint the full picture. Yes, you'd expect a heavy armor wearing class to have very high AC, wouldn't you? You would expect it to have more AC than any other alternative in the game, actually, because otherwise, what's the point? This is what you're making all those sacrifices for, armor class. Unfortunately, this is anything but the case in Wrath of the Righteous. Due to the accessibility and necessity of buff spells, monk dips, attribute boosting items, and so on, you will likely never reach the potential AC of a naked character, or even a pet, with a character that wears heavy armor. Things like the mythic ability Archmage Armor, which add your mythic rank to your mage armor spell, really drive the point home. You might think that's bad enough, but wait, there's more. There's a feat in the game called Combat Reflexes, which allows you to make a number of attacks of opportunity per round equal to your dexterity bonus. So the armor penalty is crippling you offensively as well as defensively. The cherry on top of the shit sundae, you can't rest with heavy armor on. What this actually means in practice is that if you're attacked while resting, your armored characters have to spend several seconds putting their armor on before they can actually attack. So anyway, this all came to a head finally due to the aforementioned difficulty spikes. Now, difficulty spikes come in many shapes and forms. In the best case, they're a teaching tool. The player goes, "Oh, holy crap, I can't beat this. What am I meant to do?" And the game tells them,
"Use your intellect, evade my blows."
The worst case is that you find out that you have to abandon your save completely because the decisions you made in the past were so bad that you now have absolutely no way forward no matter what you do in your current position. And that is exactly what I did. I actually wasn't as pissed off about this as you might imagine. At the time I had 3 simultaneous playthroughs going because I was having so much fun experimenting with different classes and builds, and I'd started using builds I'd gotten from online guides in my other saves. See, like I said, I already had an inkling that Armored Hulk was bad, so I'd taken steps elsewhere to prevent being boned in a similar fashion. However, that did have some knock-on effects. See, my Armored Hulk, i.e. my first character, was an angel. What I felt would be the canon leader of the Crusade, it just fits. So my other playthroughs were deliberately picked to be different. So an unfortunate consequence is that by the time I got to Act 4 and started dealing with the real meat of the story, the Commander's fate, parleying with Demon Lords and all that, it was all my Trickster playthrough. Now I have nothing against the childish fun of the Trickster, but when you're talking to a Demon Lord that could erase you with a thought, honking your nose and squirting her with a flower in your chest feels just like a little silly, like I should have done a serious playthrough first. I debated it for a while, playing my demon playthrough in the meantime, and eventually I went back to my angel playthrough, armed with my newfound knowledge of the meta and idea of how I actually wanted to build my character. In the end, I was so strong it was actually funny. I was playing a Vital Strike two-handed fighter. Vital Strike is an attack that exchanges all of your iterative attacks in a round for one gigantic swing. I was one-shotting Demon Lords when I landed crits, by virtue of rolling 48d6 for damage. This made for some really dumb cinematic moments, because Vital Strike deals its damage the moment the attack animation begins, so a fight will often look like this.
You are bad at pretending to be uninterested, imposter. I know you came down from heaven and even scooped to a conversation with that flighty killer Nocticula, the Crusader goddess, and the Lady in Shadow. So that is how far you are willing to go to be rid of me. Impossible! I am chaos and death! I am the end of times! I cannot be defeated!
This made some plot-central moments a lot sillier than they should be. There's one particular compulsory fight against a demon lord in the Angel Path that ended without me knowing what the hell happened. I had to scroll back up the combat log after the post-fight conversation to find out that apparently I had crit him for almost 1000 damage and instantly ended the fight. Speaking of plot-central moments, you can't really talk about the plot of this game without discussing the companions. They really tied them into this game extremely well, and it actually creates some genuinely difficult choices about who you want in your party. Every companion has a story arc and an ending, so I'll give my opinion on ones I'm familiar with. Ember's was great. I don't care if relentless optimism is naive and stupid in a world full of horrors, it felt good and I loved it. That was a storyline I enjoyed from start to finish. While it might feel silly and unrealistic to have demonic worshippers repent because a little elven girl told them they can still be redeemed, it starts to feel very real when they lay down their lives to protect her from their demonic masters, even knowing the horrible fate that awaits them. Ordinary humans who have done wrong, taking up arms against extraplanar horrors in the hopes that their souls can be saved. Is that not the purest form of redemption?
Please.
Also, she has an effect on my playthroughs, which I feel is most accurately summarized by this image I took from Reddit. I'm a grown man, I'm a big adult, I can play an evil lich.
You're a good person. I like you.
Lan started off great. I've seen a lot of people dislike Lan on the internet because he's kind of pathetic, but to me that just makes him genuine. The usual reason to dislike a pathetic person is because they wield their patheticness as a kind of weapon to make you feel sorry for them, but there's none of that with Lan. He doesn't back down from a fight, and he's wholly authentic about how pathetic he is. The self-effacing jokes, the striking out at himself before anyone else can, his horrific background and way of life, all of it comes together for a character that is, and has every reason to be, sincerely down in the dumps. Unfortunately, his quest conclusion is just terrible. The whole game he tells you about how much he wants to die in battle, feeling like he's achieved something, so you're like, oh, I kinda want to prevent that. I actually let him go through with it the first time before loading my save, because it was so pathetic I just couldn't believe it. He just gets stabbed and dies like a dog, or a mongrel, if you will, while you rush in and try to bail him out. What the fuck? That's not meaningful? That's just giving in to someone's suicidal savior complex. The worst part is that if you refuse to let him kill himself, he acts as though you have snubbed him completely, and his ending slide says that he lives on unfulfilled, never achieving his dreams.
Thanks, Lan. You're so awesome, Lan.
To think this was initially my favorite companion. Arueshalae is really interesting. She's a clear contrast to the other companions, each of which are somewhat gritty, grounded, and realistic in ways you may not expect. In comparison, Arueshalae is straight out of a high school anime. A demon looking for redemption, and she's a beautiful succubus romantically interested in the commander. Please. It isn't even possible to be more cliched than this. And yet, Arueshalae is so well-meaning, genuine, and horribly conflicted that you can't help but empathize with her plight. This is what it truly means when they say there are no original stories, but it doesn't matter. She's the definition of execution over originality, and it works. Her biggest problem is that she says it hurts that the commander wasn't romantically interested in her if you decide to only be her friend, which in turn hurts me as a person. Sorry, Arrow. I can already tell it'll be difficult to say no in subsequent playthroughs. Every step of her quest is cute, thoughtful, and horrible. You can taste the regret. It's easy to sell someone a character that already likes them, but still, there's legwork to be done, and it would have been really easy for Arueshalae to turn out terribly, so well done on defying the odds. Note that I haven't tried corrupting her. This is for two reasons. One is that mechanically speaking, she's terrible. Her feats are awfully distributed. She's less customizable, and she loses a class skill. She's worse than her original version in every way. But the real reason is that I just can't do it. I just can't. It just hurts too much to deliberately and repeatedly damage someone trying their utmost to redeem themselves. It's like handing a recovering alcoholic a bottle of whiskey. No, I just can't bring myself to do it, not even for the demon playthrough. Now, Wenduag is really interesting as a companion because she comes pre-broken. Nothing you do to redeem her can wash her hands clean of the heinous crimes she's already committed, which is good, because I don't want to redeem her. I want to make her worse. Redeeming her would mean coming to terms with the horrible, awful things that she's done, and I don't want to deal with that shit. I would rather have my evil character romance her and be buddies and slaughter. I haven't seen her arc through to completion yet, so no full opinion on this, but I like her. Spider-Cat is cool, and also really strong, fittingly. Daeran was amazing from minute one. He is, in my opinion, the best companion and has the best companion storyline in the game, just barely edging out Arueshalae. I didn't love killing the Inquisitor at the end of his quest, but I was romancing Daeran on my angel save, so too bad for him, I guess. The ending slide for him on that particular save drove a stake through my heart. His banter is some of the funniest in the game, his overly mean persona giving way to shaky but genuine friendships with people like Lan and Seelah, and one of my favourite dynamics between person A and B is the one where they constantly needle each other with witticisms. The way you can lean into that, like tormenting Daeran, is pretty funny, even while you're romancing him. It's great.
Such as the name of passing acquaintances, such a bore.
Wow. Bona fide blue bloods and unparalleled aristocracy. All this makes me itch to do something really crass. Ooh, like blow my nose on the curtains.
What are you waiting for, my squamous squire?
Seelah was fine. I found her a little boring as a character, but that's okay. She's at least inoffensive, somewhat of a moral compass, and mechanically speaking, she's possibly the strongest companion in the game, to the point I usually include her in all of my parties. Also, I can't help but feel she really got the short end of the stick with her storyline. So Ember gets to be relentlessly optimistic and always choose to see the good in people, and that's fine. But Seelah does it and it's never anything but a disaster? Come on, man, where's the justice? Regill is an instant classic. When people talk about wanting to be a competent, lawful evil character, this is the guy they're talking about. He is the embodiment of the ends justify the means. He gives everything to help the Crusade, will do anything to save Galarian, and is not afraid to get his hands dirty. Players the world over would kill to be as cool as Regill is. I found it very hard to criticize him for his decisions because in the end, they always benefited me and the Crusade. The only potential criticism of his character I can foresee is that if he wanted to be cynical, he's a little too perfect. His plans are never wrong, and they always work. It's a lot easier to accept a man willing to do anything to get the job done, when the things that he does always work out. But which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The things that he does always work out because he's an extremely experienced commander and frontline fighter. It's actually not unreasonable for him to be quite clever about these things, especially given the relatively mundane scope of them. It's not like he does anything truly outrageous. He just makes the sensible and logical decision every time, even if it involves sacrifice. Things like, oh, we should assault the giants hurling flaming rocks at our infantry, instead of heading into it dead on, and not exactly Mary Sue territory, you know? It's just conventional wisdom that he learned on the battlefield. If anything, it's a strength of the writing that they don't give him outlandish situations to handle just to paint him in a better light, so well done on the restraint. In the end, Regill is one of my favourite characters, even though I don't often use him in my party. I initially expected to really dislike him because, like Arueshalae, you can see the stereotype coming from a mile away. Just beautifully done, honestly. Also, he has some of the coolest voice lines.
You require my counsel. Wise. Speak with your actions, not your words.
Ironically, the only knock against him is that Hell Knight is kind of a bad class in a game about killing demons, which is something Regill himself would be really pissed off about because that doesn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever. So Woljif. Funnily enough, I absolutely hated this guy from minute zero, so much so in fact that I actually didn't pick him up at all on my first playthrough because he came off as such a creep I didn't want anything to do with him, and he never showed up later either, so I just never saw him. However, I picked him up on my Trickster playthrough and he became a valued member of my party. It's actually hard not to like him when he's been around for a bit. He's somewhat pathetic in his own way, but not so overtly as Lan. He's quite likable, even if he starts off as a real loser. Also, I can't die yet, I'm not nearly rich enough, is possibly the funniest combat line in the game. The conclusion to his questline, while admittedly cliché, is still nice enough when he realizes he has real actual friends on his side and that he doesn't need to run away. Unfortunately, the impact was somewhat lessened by how incredibly difficult the Igflee's fight is. Holy shit, I had to lower the difficulty with that one.
This is not my time.
Sociel continues a running theme of expecting not to give a shit about people, only to end up caring more than I thought I would. I still don't love him, I think he's kind of boring, even with the inner turmoil thing. Almost every companion in this game has some kind of inner conflict, and all of them are more interesting than getting really angry. However, his brother Trevor is actually really neat. As it happened, I got Trevor on my Trickster playthrough. It's apparently quite difficult to do that. One of my friends was really surprised I'd managed it on my first time encountering the situation. But I was surprised because it seemed so easy, and it later turned out that that's only easy as a Trickster, so go figure. Anyway, getting Trevor is more of an achievement medal than anything else. His actual presence in the game is not interesting, nor is he a good character mechanically. Actually, he's easily the worst built character in the game. You end up not really caring about either of those things though, because you're just happy you've reunited the brothers. As a companion, Trevor sucks on every front, but as a character plot, he's great, so I can't really complain too much. Also, not wanting to use him actually ties into his character. He's a PTSD-ridden veteran, and putting him on the front lines when he's already so broken seems mildly cruel in itself. Best that he stays behind in the camp. So Greybor. You know, it is really hard for mid or late game companions to dislodge early companions, and trust me, I am in the perfect position to understand the strength of inertia in a party-based game. That said, I actually liked Greybor quite a lot. He's not terribly deep, he isn't involved in some grand conflict beyond the life or death nature of his employment, and he isn't an attractive woman. Despite all of that, he's very likable and even sympathetic. If you choose to keep him in your employment, the writing subtly informs you that he is fully aware that you have just barely kept his humanity intact. He was this close to the abyss, literally and metaphorically. In the very end, you can even reunite him with his family, which is quite touching, and I enjoyed having left a mark on someone for the better. Camellia. Camellia. So, unlike the other companion stories, I actually already knew Camellia was a serial killer before I picked up the game because I got spoiled. I was mildly interested in her, but not that much. My primary point of interest was whether the killing was her own fault or not, because the writers had the easiest point of escape with her, which was to say, oh, the spirits make her do it, the spirits influence her. I cannot stress how easy it would have been for them to go that route, especially for a beautiful noble woman. So imagine my surprise when it turns out the writing commits to the total opposite. Finding out more about the situation makes it worse, not better, and you realize she is completely and utterly insane while being convinced of her own genius. She's a hyper-narcissist and a murderer, and the worst part is that it is completely and totally her own failing.
Open your heart to me.
I killed her on the spot, in both my Angel and Trickster playthroughs. 10 out of 10 character, I was hoping for a BDSM relationship, and I got a snuff look. I intend to keep her around on my Demon playthrough to see how awful it gets, so we'll see where that goes.
He didn't get these wounds from the fall. Be on your guard. Whatever killed him likely hasn't gone far.
Finally, Nenio. This is, I think, my least favorite companion, and it is not entirely her fault. I happen to particularly hate spellcasters. I don't like standing back and casting fireballs or whatever. I think it's boring. Again, I'm not a tabletop player. I also didn't know anything about D&D magic before I put a couple of 100 hours into this game, so picking good feats and spells was annoying. On top of that though, her companion's storyline is also really annoying. It starts with a quest you get in like Act 1, and you can't complete until Act 5, which is just great, thanks for clogging up my quest log. Then your reward is to do some of the worst, most horrible puzzles in all of gaming. The only one I didn't use a guide for and actually enjoyed was the one with the tree and the demon. I think it's called Legacy of the Ancients. I got to turn a demon into a potted plant as a trickster too, which was great. So Wrath of the Righteous has a bunch of puzzles that just feel like total shit even when you're following a guide, which is really an achievement. It's a bad sign that I regretted starting the Nenio questline, but it's even worse that when I finished it, I regretted it even more than I originally did. I won't go into the puzzles, but suffice to say, I will never do Nenio's quest again. You see the payoff coming well before you actually finish it, but then you still have to go through all of the mundane bullshit of doing it. Literally the only redeeming factors are that she remembers your name at the end and writes a little bit about you in her book and her ending slide, and that Arueshalae is quite an interesting concept for a demon lord that leaves you wishing you knew more about her, and I can appreciate the irony there. All in all, the amount of work that went into the companions absolutely shocked me. There is so much content, most of it amazing, to be discovered. In conjunction with the Mythic Path, it's unbelievable how much variation there is. There are even Mythic Path-specific companions that I haven't talked about. It's mind-blowing. It took me 172 hours to get my first ending, not because I had to grind, but because I was constantly making new characters and doing side quests and trying out party combinations and testing other mythic paths, etc, etc. I have a strong suspicion I'm going to end up having close to 600 hours played by the time I'm done. As a writer for a game myself, I am fully aware of how much blood, sweat, and tears they must have put into this game. I cannot congratulate the writers enough for their efforts in creating these characters and bringing them to life. The party banter, for instance, is likely underrated. It took me about 150 hours to hear a repeated line while resting. That represents a lot of raw work. Not particularly difficult work, but a lot of effort.
The men down in the caves are so hideous. Doesn't their appearance simply snuff out any carnal desire?
You think the face has anything to do with it? Your face, for instance. The day I touch it is the day I squeeze the life out of you.
Case in point, I just recorded that line while I was editing this video, and I have never heard it before. Additionally, the companion stories themselves are very creative and mature. They respect the reader, and I personally really appreciate that in an age where most things are spelled out for you. Characters like Camellia and Greybor were interesting enough for me to feel personally invested. Now, the actual storyline of the game. The first two acts play out exactly like you'd expect from a game about a crusade. You go around gathering power and becoming an influential figure, and in the conclusion you're appointed the commander of the crusade, owing to your influence, deeds, and mythical power. This is fine, and I don't begrudge it for its pacing. I think it's pretty well done, and you get a few glimpses of what will come later. The key highlights here are really the characters and the companions. Right at the conclusion of the act, you get the conversation with Monago, Staunton, and Nura, which depending on your chosen path can be really interesting. The Nura content with a trickster main character is so devilishly fun, I can't help but love it. It really drives home the emphasis on playing jokes as your absolute highest priority. Speaking more generally about the direction of the game, I very much enjoy the way they've done good and evil choices, most of the time. There are some evil things that you do that are unavoidable on an evil path, that cause a bit of narrative conflict if you're not trying to be too evil, but otherwise it's fine.
Why are you so slow? They're almost here!
The game made me think about the merits, and the downsides, of narrative alignment systems. See, ideally they're great. Your roleplay is rewarded by alignment shifts. You might find that your once evil character is redeemed by a good party member over time, you know, that kind of thing. Except that certain classes, quests, and features require that you stick to a specific alignment. So now you're forced to roleplay a certain way, which does actually make sense. Can you really be a barbarian if you're not chaotic? So I get it. It's a set of restrictions that you operate inside that gives a system its strength. There is one glaring problem though: a lot of alignment choices are presented to you like this. The problem with this is that if you pick good, it moves you from chaotic or lawful good towards neutral good, and likewise for evil. My trickster playthrough almost got screwed by this. Mid-game I discovered that my alignment had gotten almost halfway through neutral good, and I had to spend the next couple of days of play picking only chaotic choices, even if I didn't want to. This actually works fine for a trickster from a roleplay perspective, as a trickster is basically a member of the Fey Court given mortal form, but for other classes and paths, it can get really annoying. Additionally, a fair amount of the lawful choices are just, I don't know, there's got to be a better way to stick to the letter of the law without walking around feeling like a parking inspector handing out tickets during the apocalypse. You really don't pull any punches, you're full-on prelate Holrune all the time. I'm currently playing a lawful good Inquisitor, and while I don't have to stick to the alignment, I still want to for the roleplay, and it can be pretty difficult. I really have to pick where I make a lawful choice or a non-aligned one, and the non-aligned ones usually earn you some shit talk from your companions for not having an opinion, so that's cool. No lie, Disco Elysium was friendlier to centrists. Honestly, I was hoping for more kind and just paladin than power-hungry bureaucrat when I went lawful. In a perfect world, I would simply pick some mix of chaotic, good, evil, and lawful options, which makes me think, that sounds like I don't actually want to use this alignment system at all, but I would rather have some kind of free-form choice. Still, I do see its value as a system, it just falls on its face in a few places. Also, there is a lot of stabbing granny choices in this game, where you can choose to just murder people for fun, but they're not really a narrative thing unless you're a swarm that walks. They're just there for the players who want to murder absolutely everyone. Act 3 is where the game gives you the full experience. Crusade mode becomes available in full, the world map is populated with side quest and encounters, and there are numerous stories and goals to be unveiled. Crusade mode is an interesting gimmick. It's like a cheap simulacrum of Heroes on Might and Magic. You recruit soldiers that are used to fight actual armies of demons, rather than having your commander and 5 party members doing it, getting rewards that help you in your actual campaign and tie into the story itself. Originally, I found it difficult and annoying to get anything done with it, but once you learn the ins and outs of how it works, it's not as bad as it seems. Still, I find myself wondering if its conclusion was even necessary. In certain places it functions mostly as a time gate by locking off areas until your Mook army is strong enough to defeat a demon fort and unlock a new pathway for your main party. It helps the feel of a crusade, but not as much as you'd think. You could accomplish the same thing through other means. Overall, I'm neutral on it as a feature. As a side note, the management UI for the Crusade campaign is kind of awful and tacked on. You encounter a lot of loading screens switching between management modes, and while the loading is short, it's still present. You get the sense that they didn't really have a plan for it from the start and had to make it up as they went. One of the problems with Act 3 itself is that there are difficulty spikes that are off the charts, and ironically they're not the ones you actually expect. The red dragon that chases you down on the world map? Quite easy. The two-man draggerer that live in its basement? Bring the artillery.
Victory is worth the pain.
Blackwater, an Act 3 location, was where I gave up on my angel save. There's a particular encounter in there, it'll probably be the first time you run into a greater Calavacus, that absolutely destroyed me, no matter how buffed I was. I realized I'd finally reached the inevitable conclusion of the story that I'd been seeing hints of the whole way through. My self-made builds for my main character and companions simply weren't going to cut it. Also, hilariously, the place locks you in once you enter it. Fail the roll to get out? Too bad, you're gonna have to reload your game from before you went in. This didn't actually happen to me, I got lucky on the roll, but what an awful design decision. Overall, Act 3 is pretty sweet. Places like Winter Sun and Blackwater are really interesting, and the constant flow of events in Dresden keeps you entertained. Depending on your mythic path, this is also when you get to experience the really cool stuff it has to offer. The Trickster, for instance, surprised me with the sheer breadth of content there. The council in my bedroom closet was a genuine breath of fresh air after an Angel campaign. Act 4 is, in my opinion, the peak of the game, certainly design-wise at the very least. You plunge into the chaos of the Abyss, entering a wholly unique and foreign land, full of danger around every corner. No, seriously, I died far more times to random encounters on the street than I did to actual battles that I was expecting. The Hand of the Inheritor had to bail me out against the Vampire Lord, and you can always count on a random Marilith to mess up your day. You start to finally get some answers about your origin, this game that you're participating in, about why things are happening the way they are, what makes you so special, and reasons for Demon Lords not to just obliterate you on the spot. I will say that the first time you're there, running around Illusionera is actually really annoying, because there's this big gap of progression between getting your first coin at the bar and getting other coins to help you travel. Once you learn the layout of the city, it's not so bad, but god, I spent a lot of time just running around, wondering where I was meant to go next on my first playthrough. Still, I was willing to put up with it because the environment is just so good. Nocticula herself is also a highlight of the act. She's an interesting character, the original Succubus, and not at all what you expect given all the stories about her you've been told up to that point. Her little conversation with Ember is also cute, and I enjoy the verbal confrontation with Iomedae when you return, although Nocticula comes off as the loser in that exchange. Really though, the environment is the crown jewel here.
Sorry. I did my best.
I'm going. This will be quick.
Let us be off. Let's move.
Thanks, Lan. You're so awesome, Lan. Well, this didn't go well. The mongrel did it.
Act 5 is pretty much the conclusion of the game, returning you to the setting of Act 3 but with more stuff on the map. You can visit the old locations, but most of them won't have changed much. It's mostly new content, which is somewhat impressive in itself. The game takes on a sense of urgency by way of ushering you towards the final confrontation, and it mirrors the same sense in the player. Now that you're done dealing with the demons of the Abyss, all you really want to do is get to the end and get those last few answers that have eluded you all this time. There's a few run-ins with past encounters like Lathamas at the Dragon Burial Ground, which was possibly the most predictable plot in the game, and chasing down the ineluctable prison to fight the Hand was quite cool. My only regret is that I really loved that dude, and it sucks to see him end up the way he does. I wish there'd been a way to save him. Also, I was really hoping to be able to permanently kill Baphomet, but now that I'm thinking about it, I guess that wouldn't be allowed because the game takes place in the canon of Pathfinder. In Act 5, there's a dungeon that starts off as a Fallout reference, which to be clear, I hated from minute 1 because I hate fun. You have such a great setting, why are you injecting these juvenile references into it? It culminates in you being forced to use turn-based mode. This to me is a sin so blatant it makes me question what was going on in the dev team. If you let a player pick their preferred mode of play, i.e. real-time with pause, you should never, ever force them to play the other way. They chose their mode for a deliberate reason. Funnily enough, the encounter itself was trivial, but I'll still never do it again. Absolutely baffled that they did this. I just want to say, there are some extremely heavy spoilers in this section. If you've watched this video up till now, first off, congratulations on making it this far, but if you've watched this video up till now without playing the game, it's actually fine. It won't really have ruined anything for you. But if you listen to this next part, it will. I highly recommend you skip ahead to the rating part if you're watching without having played. Anyway, near the conclusion of Act 5, you finally get the ability to see the cause of all the events thus far. You get a crystal that you take to Arueshalae's laboratory, and it tells you the story of her child, and I think this is genius. I'm sure most people have at some point in their lives seen a meme about the quality of villains, with the highest tier of villain being those whose motivations you can't find a flaw in, and are arguably better than the heroes. While that's debatable, you can certainly understand a mother's grief over her lost child. If the average parent had the capability, they would also tear the planes asunder to bring back their loved ones. The conclusion of the game actually surprised me with a little twist about Arueshalae not seeing her own child in you. I had been laboring under the illusion that the main character was her child resurrected in some form, and while that remained technically true, it does make you understand what she's going through, to see that her experiment had failed. Now, I've only gotten one ending so far, so I don't know if there are other endings where she sees more of her child in you, or if you can convince her you are her child completely or whatever. I haven't gone looking for spoilers yet. I'm gonna go get a few more endings before I go check and find out what the secret ending is about. The Angel of Mercy ending was fairly somber, but exactly what I expected from a protector of humanity. A grand, final self-sacrifice for the sake of all of Galarian. It was very thematic and felt like a fitting end to my character's saga, and also I enjoyed imploring Pharasma not to punish Arueshalae too harshly. I'm yet to get an ending on my Trickster and my Demon, as well as start a playthrough as Azata and Aeon, so we'll see where I end up on those. Let's rate the game. If I was going to give this game a number rating, it would be a 9, maybe even a 9.5. The writing, and note that I'm not just talking about the plot here, is absolutely stellar, and elevates the game to levels rarely reached. The crunch is satisfying enough to be enjoyable, and though actual combat tends towards the simple side, I find myself not really minding. The visual effects and incredible sounds go a long way towards making it entertaining, and the ability to vary your playthroughs with class, companion, and mythic path selection is truly impressive. Seriously, it's unique in the genre. You won't find this amount of variation in any other RPG. I would say the writing is better than any other RPG released in the past 15 years, beaten out only by Mask of the Betrayer, which I personally hold as my 10 out of 10 RPG. The combat is let down by the buffing thing, but I feel like that's really more of a D&D system problem. Other games like Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 aren't beholden to D&D, and they let you run around without having to worry too much about stacking buffs up. To be honest, I much prefer that style of combat. Even in games like Dark Souls, I keep my magic used to an absolute minimum, and usually don't use it at all, not even to buff my weapon. Nevertheless, the combat is fun, and frankly, though I don't remember it very well, the combat in Mask of the Betrayer wasn't exactly groundbreaking either. All in all, I'm obsessed with this game and really looking forward to the Season 2 stuff. I own the DLCs, but haven't actually played any of them yet, since I'm mostly interested in the main campaign, but I'm sure I'll check them out eventually. For now though, I'm going to continue my current playthroughs and see about starting even more. I already have an Aeon run I started while making this video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to have a nice Christmas. Peace.